We start today with one of the major impeachment inquiry investigations against Joe Biden very quickly imploding. We suspected this was not going to go particularly well for Republicans, mostly because Joe Biden's been in politics for 50 years, and many of the sorts of claims that they are making against him to justify the impeachment inquiry, we would have evidence of by now if this was really the sort of behavior that Joe Biden was engaging in. But let's put that aside. One of the major claims that Republicans want to look into to find evidence for, they don't actually have it, is that Joe Biden was making policy pushes and policy decisions as vice president of the United States in order to benefit himself and his family, his son Hunter Biden, financially. One of the big claims around this relates to withholding $1 billion in U.S. aid to Ukraine unless this prosecutor, Shokin, was removed from his job. Unfortunately, it is now incredibly clear, as if it wasn't clear before, that when Joe Biden spoke about that, he was just transmitting what American and actually coalition policy was at the time. So let's explain a little bit more about this. Newsweek reports, Joe Biden impeachment claim questioned. Okay. Quote, Republican efforts to impeach Joe Biden suffered a blow after fresh evidence emerged showing his bid to remove Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in 2015 represented U.S. government policy. A professor in U.S. politics told Newsweek that unless opposing evidence was uncovered, the impeachment was likely to backfire on the Republican Party. Then Vice President Biden met Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president at the time, in December 2015, after which he claimed he'd threatened to withhold $1 billion in U.S. aid to Kyiv unless Shokin was removed from his post, which he subsequently was. Now, this is the critical part. These two paragraphs explain it as clearly as anyone can. Some conservatives, this is the argument they make for his impeachment. Some conservatives have suggested Biden was attempting to protect Ukrainian energy company Burisma, the board of which his son Hunter Biden joined in 2014 by moving against Shokin. However, a pre-meeting memo prepared for Biden by the State Department dated November 25, 2015, made it clear that removing Shokin was the Obama administration's policy. The document called for Shokin's removal, claiming he was widely regarded as an obstacle to fighting corruption, if not a source of the problem. So let me simplify this as much as I can. The argument that the right is making is as follows. Shokin was investigating Burisma. Hunter Biden was on the board of Burisma. Biden worked to help his son make money by getting Shokin out of the way so he would stop investigating Burisma, which would be bad for Hunter Biden's pocket. And maybe if you believe that Hunter was giving kickbacks to Joe Biden, it would be bad for Joe Biden as well. That's the argument from the right. The truth, as we already knew, yet we now have additional documents that are showing this to be the case. As we already knew, it was Obama administration policy in consultation with many of our allies that Shokin was actually corrupt and that he should be removed. This is what we suspected all along, and we now have additional evidence for that. This is only one line of attack against Joe Biden. There are other lines of attack against him as well, but this one is very quickly falling apart. Joe Biden, as I said earlier, has been in national politics for 50 years. To some degree, it's reasonable to think if they still haven't found anything on Biden, maybe it's because he's been pretty careful not to do stupid stuff. Now, you could go further and you could say, well, but David, fine. It was Obama administration policy that they wanted Shokin out, but maybe that was Obama administration policy because Joe Biden went to Barack Obama and said, hey, let's get this Shokin guy out of the way. He's corrupt. But the real reason Biden went to Obama is because he wanted to get him out of the way so he stops investigating Burisma, which would be bad for Hunter Biden. If that's the argument they are next going to make, at some point they need evidence. With all of these things, we've talked about it with the Trump crimes, and they're going after him for political reasons, and Joe Biden is orchestrating the arrest. And with every single one of these things, they have no evidence. At some point, we have to be able to say, you have no evidence because there is no evidence. The counterpoint that the conspiracists are coming up with is there's no evidence because Biden has done a really good job at getting rid of the evidence. At some point, we have to be able to put a line and say, no, there's no evidence because there just is no evidence. It doesn't exist. And we get to this incredible contrast where on the one hand, they want these right wingers, these MAGA Trumpists want us to believe that Joe Biden is demented. He doesn't know what day it is. He can't string together a sentence. And he's basically hopped up on uppers so that he can spend 5 minutes in public before going back to having, borscht spoon fed into his mouth by aides because he can't even feed himself. That's one story. The other story is Biden is the most devious and brilliant crime family boss in history, where he has not only committed dozens of acts of corruption and bribery, but he's also perfectly covered them up so that no one can find a shred of evidence of them. At a certain point, we have to apply a sort of casual version of Occam's razor and say, there's no evidence because the evidence doesn't exist. There's no evidence because Joe Biden genuinely isn't doing the things they have accused him of doing. If and when we get to that point where these MAGA Trumpists will acknowledge and accept that, I don't know. They still think Trump won in 2020. So to some degree, it's like they may never actually accept it. But that's where we are today. One major impeachment line against Biden collapsing before their very eyes, just evaporating.